What if I told you that a whole part of our history, the size of a continent, was built on maps that disappeared? In the 17th century, Siberia was the last mystery on the planet. Europeans drew dragons here, while Russian pioneers created secret maps. One of these maps, commissioned by the Tsar, was so important that it was called the Key to Siberia. But it disappeared. Where did the map worth a fortune disappear to? Was it destroyed? Stolen? Or does it hold a secret that was never meant to be revealed? Today, we will embark on a quest to find the cartographic Mona Lisa and ghost towns to understand how Siberia was actually drawn. In the 16th and early 17th centuries, the vast expanses east of the Ural Mountains remained almost a complete mystery to enlightened Europe. A terra incognita, a blank spot that cartographers filled not with real rivers and cities, but with bizarre myths and speculations. On maps of that time, created by masters such as Gerard Mercator, Siberia was a distorted, fantastical space. The outlines of North Asia were far from reality, as cartographers simply lacked reliable information. They relied on the works of ancient authors such as Pliny and Ptolemy, as well as the notes of travelers, the most famous of whom was Marco Polo, whose travels took place in the 13th century. As a result, non-existent mountain ranges appeared on maps, and the great Siberian rivers flowed in the wrong directions or were missing altogether. The Arctic Ocean was often labeled as the Scythian or Tartar Sea. These maps reflected not so much the geography as the sum of the misconceptions of European science at the time. For more than 100 years, until the appearance of the works of Amsterdam burgomaster Nicolaas Witsen, it was Mercator's world map of 1569, with all its inaccuracies, that was considered the most authoritative source of knowledge about Siberia. When you look at these old folios, you are struck by how much reality differed from people's ideas about it. Cartographers, as if by agreement, depicted incredible things beyond the Urals. The European part of Russia was drawn fairly accurately on the same maps, but once you cross the invisible line, the realm of fantasy began. These territories, which Europeans collectively called Tartary, were home to mythical kingdoms, such as the legendary kingdom of John the Presbyter, which was long sought after in Asia and Africa. Siberia itself often looks like a narrow strip of land squeezed between the Ural Mountains and the Pacific coast, which, in turn, was depicted in a completely different place from where it actually is. These maps are not just documents, but monuments to human ignorance and, at the same time, to the great desire to understand the world. They tell the story of how painstakingly and slowly humanity progressed toward creating an accurate picture of its planet. And the story of the disappearance of one of the key maps of this region is not just a detective story, but a drama about the loss of knowledge that could have changed our understanding of the exploration of Siberia forever. While Europeans filled their maps of Siberia with myths, the Muscovite kingdom already had its own, purely practical methods of navigation. These were not the maps we are familiar with, but so-called road books, detailed textual descriptions of routes. They indicated rivers, distances between points in days of travel or versts, and the location of winter camps and forts. These documents were invaluable to servicemen, merchants, and pioneers who were exploring the endless expanses. Alongside the road books, the first hand-drawn maps were created. These were primitive diagrams of individual regions, rivers, or districts, created without any mathematical basis or accurate projections. Their main purpose was not geographical accuracy, but practical use, to show the way, the location of land and settlements. The pinnacle of this early Russian cartography was to be the Book of the Great Map, a hypothetical collection of maps of the entire Muscovite state, created by order of Ivan the Terrible. Historians still argue about what exactly this big drawing looked like. Most likely, it was a huge wall map panel sewn together from many sheets. Unfortunately, the map itself has not survived. The reasons for its loss remain a matter of speculation. Perhaps it was destroyed in one of the many fires in Moscow, or during the time of troubles, or simply fell into disrepair due to the fragility of the material. However, its textual description has survived. The very Book of the Great Map, compiled in 1627. This book is a detailed commentary on the lost map. It lists hundreds of rivers, cities, and localities, indicating the distances between them. In essence, it is the key to a map that has disappeared forever. Reading this text today, one can only imagine the grandeur and scale of the original source. The loss of the Great Map was a real tragedy for Russian cartography. It was not just a set of diagrams, but a symbol of state power, an attempt to comprehend and record its vast possessions. If it had survived, our understanding of the geographical knowledge of that time would be much more complete. But history does not tolerate the subjunctive mood. The disappearance of this fundamental work meant that throughout the 17th century, the compilation of a general map of Siberia had to start practically from scratch, gathering scattered drawings and paintings from each new expedition of explorers. The need for a new, more accurate map of Siberia became increasingly acute as the Russians advanced eastward. In 1626, the governor of Tobolsk received a letter from Moscow with a direct instruction: draw sketches of geographical objects. This task was entrusted to people who were not professional cartographers but had invaluable practical experience. And so, in 1667, in Tobolsk, which was then the administrative center of Siberia, a real breakthrough was made. Under the leadership of Voivode Pyotr Ivanovich Godunov, the drawing of the Siberian lands was created. This document became the first known Russian map covering a vast territory from the Urals to the Pacific Ocean. Godunov's map was strikingly different from everything that had been done before it. To the modern eye, it looks extremely unusual. Its main feature is its southward orientation. That is, north is at the bottom and south is at the top. This was a common tradition in pre-Petrine cartography, where the top of the map often corresponded to the direction of the main rivers or the main direction of movement, south towards warmer lands. Gorodunov's map did not have a grid. Coordinates, as we understand them today, were not used at that time. Instead, a dense and fairly accurate network of rivers served as a guide. Rivers were the main roads of Siberia, and knowledge of them was vital. The map showed not only rivers, but also cities and forts founded by the Russians, as well as the settlements of indigenous peoples. Despite its primitiveness from our point of view, it was a huge step forward for its time. The map summarized all the information about the Siberian lands that had been accumulated by that time, obtained as a result of Cossack expeditions, questioning of experienced people and indigenous inhabitants. It gave a complete, albeit not without errors, picture of the scale and structure of the Asian part of the country. Godunov's map became such an important document that copies of it quickly spread and even reached Europe, where they had a significant influence on Western cartographers, including the aforementioned Nikolai Witsen. This drawing proved that the Russian Empire had its own unique geographical knowledge that could compete with that of Europe. Although the original Godunov map has not survived, numerous copies and a detailed description of it have come down to us, allowing us to appreciate the scale of the work that went into it. What exactly could be seen on Peter Godunov's map? It was a veritable encyclopedia of Siberia at the time. It showed the Ob River basin in considerable detail. The great Lena River was also shown flowing into the sea that washed the eastern coast of Siberia. In the southeast corner of the map, China was separated by two walls, reflecting vague but already existing ideas about the southern neighbor. Attached to the drawing was an explanatory note, or, as we would say today, an explication, which made the map even more valuable. This list from the drawing of the Siberian lands contained a detailed description of rivers, settlements, and, most importantly, the distances between them. These distances were measured not only in versts, but also in days of horseback riding or ship travel. This approach was widespread at the time and provided a practical understanding of the scale of the territory. However, despite its revolutionary nature, Godunov's map was far from perfect. It did not yet show the Russian advance beyond the Yenisei River or the new towns and forts established there. The easternmost border of more or less accurate knowledge remained the Ob River, and the interior space beyond it was filled in very roughly. Kamchatka and Chukotka were completely absent from the map. It was an honest document that reflected the real level of knowledge, without any attempts to guess or embellish. The secrets of this map lie not so much in what it contains as in what it does not contain. It is like a snapshot, capturing a certain stage in the great epic of the conquest of Siberia. It shows us the boundary between the known and unknown worlds in the minds of Russians in the mid-17th century. By studying it, we can understand the challenges facing the next generations of pioneers. They had to fill in the huge blank spots in the east, map new rivers such as the Amur, explore the coast of the Arctic Ocean, and finally reach the easternmost tip of the continent. In 1672, a revised version of the map was published, known as the Map of All Siberia to the Chinese Empire and to Nikaskoye. It was updated with new data, but did not fundamentally change the overall picture. The Godunov map became the foundation on which all subsequent Russian cartography of Siberia was built until the era of Semyon Remezov. Its lost original is a lost standard, a reference point from which the genuine scientific understanding of the boundless Siberian expanses began. News of Russian geographical discoveries in Siberia, albeit belatedly, reached Europe. The Netherlands, the leading maritime and trading power of the time, took a particular interest in these lands. One of the most curious and influential people of his time was Nicolaas Witsen, an Amsterdam burgomaster, merchant, diplomat, and passionate cartographer. He never visited Siberia, but devoted decades of his life to gathering information about this mysterious land. Witsen used his extensive network of contacts, including diplomats and merchants, to obtain copies of Russian maps, travel guides, and reports from pioneers in Moscow. He carefully compared and analyzed this disparate data, trying to piece together a coherent picture. Among his sources were undoubtedly copies of Godunov's map. The result of this titanic work was the publication in 1687 of the new geographical map of the northern and eastern parts of Asia and Europe. This map, dedicated to the young Tsar Peter Alexeyevich, became a real sensation and for a long time determined the European view of Siberia. Whitson's map was much more detailed and accurate than all its predecessors. It was the first time in Western cartography that Lake Teletskoye, connected by the Bia River to the Ob, appeared. The Tazovskaya Bay and the rivers Pur and Taz flowing into it were depicted in detail. The lower Tunguska region, the Angara River, and Lake Baikal, with the city of Irkutsk, were marked on the Yenisei River. The Laptov Sea was named the Lena Sea. In the northeast, the Yana, Indigirka, and even the distant Anadyr rivers were depicted. However, when creating his map, Whitson could not avoid mistakes. He worked with second- and third-hand information, which was sometimes contradictory and incomplete. Therefore, his map contains real geographical features alongside fantastical details borrowed from old sources or resulting from misinterpretation of Russian data. For example, the contours of the Arctic Ocean coastline were still very approximate. Nevertheless, Whitson's map marked a new stage in the cartography of Siberia. It showed how far the Russians had advanced in exploring their eastern possessions. For Europe, it was a revelation. The map enjoyed enormous authority and was copied and republished many times by other European cartographers over the decades. It was a view of Siberia from the west, but through the prism of Russian discoveries. And it was this map that paved the way for the emergence of the greatest cartographic masterpiece of the 17th century, the works of Semyon Remezov. While Whitson was in Amsterdam trying to piece together his mosaic of Siberia, in Siberia itself, in Tobolsk, there lived and worked a man who was destined to create the most accurate and detailed portrait of this land possible in the 17th century. His name was Semyon Ulyanovich Remezov. He was neither a geographer in the European sense nor a nobleman. He was a servant of the state, a boyar's son, an architect, a historian, and by vocation, a cartographer. Remezov was a Siberian through and through. He was born, raised, and lived his entire life in Tobolsk, and he knew and loved this harsh land. Unlike Whitson, he did not work with retellings, but with primary sources. He personally traveled throughout Siberia, gathering information, interviewing experienced people, studying local archives and old drawings. His work was not desk research, but lively field work. Remezov's talent did not go unnoticed. In 1696, while in Moscow, he was introduced to the young Tsar Peter I. Peter, who was keenly interested in geography and sought to put cartography in Russia on a scientific footing, appreciated the Siberians' knowledge and energy. According to legend, it was then that Remezov received a personal assignment from the Tsar to compile a new, complete, and accurate atlas of the whole of Siberia. This task became his life's work. Returning to Tobolsk, Remezov set to work with redoubled energy. He organized an entire expedition, sending his assistants to different corners of Siberia, with instructions to collect drawings and descriptions of the land. He developed a unified system of symbols to bring the disparate data to a common denominator. He himself drew up maps of the districts, which were then to form the basis of the general atlas. Semyon Remezov was not just an executor. He was a creator, an artist, and a scientist all at once. His maps are not dry diagrams, but living works filled with detail. On them, one can find not only rivers and cities, but also information about minerals, ethnographic sketches, historical notes, and even migration routes. He was a man of a transitional era. His works combine the old, pre-Petrine tradition of drawing with new, more scientific approaches that were required by the times and his far-sighted monarch. He was the very man who stood on the shoulders of giants like Godunov, but was able to see and capture much more. The culmination of many years of work by Semyon Remezov and his sons was the Drawing Book of Siberia, completed in 1701. This work is rightly considered the first Russian geographical atlas. It was not a single map, but a collection of 23 large-format maps that together covered the entire territory of Siberia, known at the time, from the Urals to Kamchatka. The Sketchbook of Siberia is a unique monument not only to cartography, but also to history and ethnography. Each sheet of the atlas was dedicated to a specific region or district. Remezov did not simply draw the outlines of rivers and place markers for cities. He filled the maps with life. They show the river network in detail and mark all known settlements, cities, forts, settlements, villages, and winter camps. Churches, monasteries, and tax districts are indicated. Particular attention was paid to roads, both land and water, the main arteries that connected this vast space. Unlike European maps, Remezov's atlas was created for internal use. It was incredibly detailed in matters that were important for the administration and development of the territory. The maps contain notes on deposits of minerals such as salt, saltpeter, and mica. The habitats of various Siberian peoples are marked with their names, making the atlas an invaluable ethnographic source. Remezov retained the traditional Russian orientation towards the south. He also did not use mathematical projections or a grid, which may make his maps appear distorted to modern viewers. However, their value lies not in mathematical accuracy, but in the encyclopedic completeness and reliability of the factual material. As before, the road and river network served as a guide. Remezov himself wrote in the preface to the atlas that he created it not by stealing, not by cheating, but truthfully. Fortunately, the fate of the Sketchbook of Siberia turned out to be happier than that of many of its predecessors. The original of this grandiose work has survived and is now kept in the Russian State Library in Moscow. Leafing through its pages, we can see Siberia through the eyes of a man who knew it like no other. This is not just a collection of maps. It is a complete, detailed, and surprisingly vivid account of a whole world that was hidden from the rest of the planet for centuries. This atlas was the culmination of the development of Russian cartography in the 17th century. But even before the atlas was completed, in 1698, Semyon Remezov brought another of his masterpieces to the Siberian office in Moscow, a huge, hand-drawn, large drawing of Siberia. If the drawing book was an atlas, then this drawing was a single continuous canvas, a kind of general map. It is this artifact that experts today call the Mona Lisa of cartography. And there are good reasons for this. Firstly, its uniqueness. It is the only surviving monument of Russian cartography of this type from the late 17th century. It is a huge canvas measuring 213 by 277 centimeters. Second, it's mysterious. The map still holds a lot of secrets. Like other works by Remezov, it's oriented to the south and doesn't have a grid. Cartography historian Professor Alexei Postnikov came up with a cool idea that nature itself served as a sort of grid for Remezov. In Siberia, most of the major rivers flow in a meridional direction from south to north, and the main land routes were laid in a latitudinal direction from west to east. Their intersections created a natural coordinate system that was understandable to anyone at that time. The map is incredibly informative. Since the cartographer sought to depict all the information known to him, there are many text notes on the map. Here, it is indicated that gold can be found. And there, abandoned carts. A tiny fragment of the Moscow Tsardom is modestly tucked away on the right edge of the map, but the northern lands are drawn with remarkable detail. Remezov marked the Samoyed winter camps and even made notes next to the images of yurts, uninhabited or inhabited. It was not just a map, but a strategic document, an economic reference book. The fate of this drawing is remarkable. After its creation, it was apparently kept in archives, and then its trail was lost. It was rediscovered only at the beginning of the 20th century, when, on the initiative of the Russian Geographical Society, it was transferred from the imperial residence, the Yekaterinburg Palace, to the Society's archives. It is this drawing that can be considered the very lost map that, fortunately, has been found. It disappeared from the sight of scientists for 2 centuries, only to reveal to the world the full extent of the geographical knowledge of that era. One of the most intriguing aspects of ancient maps of Siberia is the presence of cities that no longer exist today. Their names stir the imagination: Mangazeya, Grustina, Serponov, Jordan. Modern historians and archaeologists are racking their brains. Did these cities really exist? And if so, where did they disappear to? Or are they simply mistakes made by cartographers, carried over from one map to another? The most famous example of such a vanished city is Mangazeya. Unlike many others, its existence is an indisputable historical fact. Founded in 1601 on the Taz River, Mangazeya was the first Russian polar city in Siberia. In the 17th century, it became the largest center of the fur trade, a veritable gold rush capital where merchants and hunters flocked. Mangazeya's wealth was so great that in 1619, the government, fearing smuggling and the infiltration of foreign traders, banned sea routes to the city. This was the beginning of the end. Trade routes shifted south, the city began to decline, and frequent fires finished it off. In 1672, the garrison was transferred, and the city was finally abandoned, literally disappearing into the tundra. Its exact location was forgotten for centuries, and only rediscovered by archaeologists in the 20th century. The history of Mangazeya shows how quickly even a large and wealthy city could disappear in Siberia. But what about other, lesser-known settlements that dot European maps of the 16th and 17th centuries, such as Mercator's Atlas? Cities with names such as Grustina or Serponov were often depicted as large, walled settlements in the Ob River basin. However, no archaeological evidence of their existence has been found to date. So where did they come from? There are several versions. According to one, they could be distorted names of real, but less significant settlements, or temporary trading posts of indigenous peoples, which Europeans mistakenly took for large cities. According to another version, these are ghost towns, cartographic errors that one cartographer copied from another, and so they traveled across maps for centuries. These mysterious cities are another example of how difficult it was to separate truth from fiction in those days. They symbolize the gap between the real exploration of Siberia by Russian pioneers and its vague, often fantastical reflection in the minds of Europeans. Why were there so many inaccuracies on 17th century maps, even those created in Russia itself? Were these deliberate distortions or inevitable errors? The answer lies in the very process of gathering geographical information at that time. Semyon Remezov and Peter Godunov had no satellites, theodolites, or chronometers to accurately determine longitude. Their main tools were a compass, paper, and, most importantly, human testimony. Information was gathered bit by bit. The basis for the maps were descriptions and drawings made by participants in military and research expeditions. Every Cossack chieftain or serviceman setting off for unknown lands was instructed to draw sketches of the lands, rivers, and pastures. Upon his return, he would submit his report and sketches. These primary documents were of varying quality. Some were more observant and accurate, others less so. Another important source was questioning. Cartographers such as Remezov spent hours talking to experienced people, skilled hunters, traders, and guides who had spent decades traveling along Siberian rivers and trails. These people had phenomenal memories and could describe hundreds of kilometers of river routes, the location of tributaries, rapids, and wintering grounds from memory. They also interviewed indigenous people, foreigners, who knew their lands like no one else. However, oral information is unreliable. Distances, expressed in days of travel, could vary greatly depending on the season, weather, and speed of travel. The names of rivers and localities could be distorted in transmission. Rumors and legends told around the campfire were sometimes taken as reliable facts and ended up on the maps. The cartographer's task was to bring all this diverse and often contradictory information together into a coherent whole. It was a titanic analytical task. Remezov had to decide which of the three different reports about the course of the same river to believe, where the mountain range described actually was, and whether a particular city really existed. Inevitably, errors crept into this mosaic. Some drawings were misinterpreted, some oral evidence was misunderstood. Once these errors found their way onto an authoritative map, they could then be reproduced for decades. Thus, old maps of Siberia are not photographs of the terrain, but rather a collective portrait painted by dozens of different artists. They are an honest document of their era, reflecting not only geographical knowledge, but also the methods used to obtain it, with all their strengths and weaknesses. Errors and blank spots on European maps of Siberia gave rise to one of the most enduring and popular pseudo-historical myths, the legend of Great Tartary. On many Western maps, from the late Middle Ages to the 18th century, vast areas of Asia, including Siberia, Central Asia, and the Far East, were labeled Tartaria, or Grand Tartary. Conspiracy theorists see this as proof of the existence in the past of a giant, highly developed Slavic Aryan empire, the history of which is allegedly being hidden from us. However, historical science offers a simple and logical explanation for this phenomenon, which has nothing to do with conspiracy theories. The term Tatars, and in its Latinized form, Tartars, appeared in Europe in the 13th century during the Mongol conquests. Because of its similarity to Tartarus, the ancient name for hell, Europeans began to call all nomadic peoples who came from the east by this name. Over time, this name stuck to all the lands east of Russia and Persia, about which Europeans had a very vague idea. Tartaria, on maps, was not the name of a specific state, but a geographical term, synonymous with unknown, distant, and wild Asia, inhabited by non-Christian peoples. Cartographers simply used this word to fill in the gaps on their maps. When Russian explorers began actively exploring Siberia, They brought back accurate information about rivers, cities, and peoples. However, European cartographers, receiving this new data, acted inconsistently. They marked real Russian cities such as Tobolsk and Yakutsk on the map, but left the old generalized name Tartary for the entire territory. The result was a bizarre hybrid, a map with elements of modern geography, but within the framework of an old, outdated concept. Some maps even have inscriptions such as Muscovite Tartary or Chinese Tartary, which clearly shows that Tartary was not an empire for Europeans, but merely a geographical region. The myth of Great Tartary is a classic example of how misinterpretation of historical sources, in this case old maps, can lead to the creation of an entire fictional universe. Disappeared cities and inaccurate contours only add fuel to the fire of these theories. But in reality, these maps do not tell the story of a mythical empire, but the story of real geographical discoveries and the gradual elimination of centuries-old misconceptions. Why did so many Russian maps and drawings from the 17th century, including the originals of Ivan the Terrible's Great Drawing and Godunov's maps, disappear, while European maps from the same period have survived in large numbers? The answer to this question is multifaceted and related to the peculiarities of the era. First, secrecy. Geographical maps in the Muscovite state were considered documents of strategic importance. They contained information about borders, communication routes, the location of fortresses, and natural resources. If such a map fell into the hands of an enemy, for example, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or Sweden, the consequences could be catastrophic. Therefore, the drawings were kept in strict secrecy in the archives of the relevant orders, analogous to ministries, and access to them was strictly limited. They were not printed in large quantities, as in Europe. Each map was a unique handwritten work. Secondly, the materials and storage conditions. The maps were created on short-lived materials, paper or fabric, which were easily damaged by damp, mold, and light. A centralized archival storage system, as we understand it today, did not yet exist. Documents were often stored in wooden buildings, which were defenseless against the main scourge of Old Moscow: fires. During the 17th century, the city burned to the ground several times, and entire archives were irretrievably lost in the fires, along with priceless cartographic materials. Thirdly, the attitude towards old documents. In an era when geographical knowledge was rapidly changing, old maps quickly became obsolete. As soon as a new, more accurate drawing appeared, the old one could be considered useless junk and simply thrown away or used for household purposes. The value of maps as historical documents was not yet fully appreciated at that time. The European approach was different. Cartography in Europe was not only a state activity, but also a commercial one. The cartographic workshops of Mercator, Blaeu, and Whitsun printed atlases in large print runs for sale. These atlases found their way into hundreds of libraries, universities, and private collections, which ensured their preservation. In Russia, however, maps were unique, secret, and utilitarian products. That is why every surviving Russian map from the 17th century, like Remezov's works, is a true miracle and a priceless treasure. Despite the loss of many originals, the history of Siberia's lost maps and cities is not over. Today, the pioneers with compasses have been replaced by scientists with ground-penetrating radar and satellite images. Historians, archaeologists, and geographers continue their search, trying to restore lost pages of history and unravel the mysteries of old drawings. One of the main methods is to compare maps with modern data. Scientists superimpose old drawings, such as copies of Godunov's map or sheets from Remezov's atlas, onto modern topographic maps and satellite images. Using the river network as a basis, they try to locate the places where the disappeared forts, winter camps, and villages might have been. This is painstaking work that requires taking into account changes in river courses and the landscape over the past centuries. Once a potential location has been identified, archaeologists get to work. Archaeological surveys and excavations allow them to find material evidence of the existence of settlements. This is how the legendary Mangazeya was rediscovered. At the site where old maps placed the city, archaeologists found the remains of wooden buildings, household items, coins, and other artifacts that not only confirmed the city's existence, but also revealed much about its life and the reasons for its demise. Modern technologies open up new possibilities. Analysis of satellite images in different spectral ranges can reveal anomalies in the relief and vegetation that indicate the presence of ancient structures underground. Geophysical methods, such as magnetic prospecting or ground-penetrating radar scanning, allow us to look underground without excavating and detect the outlines of foundations or defensive ditches. Historians and archives continue to search for new documents. Skaski, reports from military personnel, customs books, monastery records that may contain references to unknown settlements or shed light on the history of the creation and use of maps. Each document found is another piece of a huge mosaic. Thus, the search for lost maps and cities today is an interdisciplinary science. It is a dialogue between the past and the present, where an ancient drawing guides a modern satellite and an archaeologist's find confirms a historian's guess. And who knows, maybe one day, in the permafrost or in a lost archive, a discovery will be made that will make us look at the history of Siberia's exploration in a whole new way. The cartographic Mona Lisa, Semyon Remezov's large drawing of Siberia from 1698, kept its secrets for 3 centuries, not only in its content, but also in its physical condition. This unique artifact has never undergone serious scientific restoration. Time, storage conditions, and the fragility of the materials have left their mark on it. But quite recently, the Russian Geographical Society, which holds the map in its archives, initiated an unprecedented project to save and study it. The restoration process began with the first preparatory stage, ultra-detailed photography. Given the enormous size of the canvas, this was no easy task. The map was photographed in a single shot using a special lens and special fluorescent lighting, which minimizes distortion and achieves the most accurate color reproduction possible. Then, specialists began photographing the map in sections, creating a high-resolution digital copy that shows every crack, every letter, and every tiny detail. This digital duplicate of the map is of enormous scientific value in itself, allowing researchers from around the world to study it without touching the fragile original. The next step was physical and chemical analysis. Using a surgical scalpel, several microscopic samples were taken from the canvas. Their analysis made it possible to accurately determine the composition of the fabric on which the drawing was made, as well as the composition of the paints and inks used by Remezov. This knowledge is critical for choosing the right restoration technique. It was necessary to understand which chemicals could be used for cleaning and which could damage this unique monument. Based on the data obtained, a restoration commission, which included leading experts from the country's major museums, developed a plan for further action. Restoration is a slow and painstaking process that can take years. Experts will have to strengthen the dilapidated fabric base, clean the surface of centuries-old dust and dirt, and preserve the image to stop its further destruction. This project is not just an attempt to preserve a unique artifact. It is an opportunity to look into the creative laboratory of a great cartographer, understand his working methods, and perhaps uncover new secrets that are still hidden in the details of his creation. Thanks to modern technology, the map that disappeared for 2 centuries and has now been rediscovered is experiencing a rebirth. The history of 17th-century maps of Siberia is not just a history of geographical discoveries. It is a story of how a nation came to understand itself and its vast expanses. The maps of Godunov, Witsen, and Remezov, even with their errors and inaccuracies, were not just diagrams of the terrain. They were instruments of power, economy, and culture. These maps, sometimes inaccurate and partially lost, had a huge impact on real life. They guided the flow of settlers, showed where to build new forts, where to send expeditions for furs, and where to look for minerals. They shaped people's image of Siberia, no longer as a wild and hostile frontier, but as an integral part of a vast country full of untold riches and great opportunities. The disappearance of many of these maps is not just the loss of historical documents. It is the loss of a part of the national memory. We can only guess what other knowledge was contained in Ivan the Terrible's Great Map, or in the original Godunov map. Perhaps they marked trade routes that we do not know about, or settlements that disappeared without a trace even before Remezov's arrival. Each such loss is a broken thread in the narrative. But the legacy of these invisible maps lives on. It lives in the very fact of the exploration of Siberia, which would have been impossible without these first, albeit imperfect, guidebooks. It lives on in the works of Semyon Remezov, who was able to summarize and preserve for us the work of dozens and hundreds of nameless pioneers and cartographers. It lives on in modern research that continues the work begun 400 years ago. The mystery of the missing map of Siberia has no clear answer, because such a map, unified and absolutely accurate, could not have existed in the 17th century. But there was a great collective effort, a dream of creating such a map. And this dream, embodied in scattered drawings, atlases, lost and rediscovered masterpieces, became the driving force that led Russia to the east. By studying this history, we understand that a map is not just a reflection of reality. It is a way of creating it.